Do you truly believe there's a place for you here? My mother-in-law's words sliced through the air as we sat in the restaurant, the aroma of the lavish meal before us tainted by her disdain. You're just a daughter-in-law, not blood, she added, a smirk playing on her lips. Her hand waved dismissively, a gesture that felt like an invitation to leave. Anger coursed through me, making my hands tremble as I pushed back my chair to stand. But before I could exit the room, she halted me with a raised hand. Wait. What about the bill? If you're leaving early, leave the money, she demanded, a smug expression on her face. I met her gaze with a defiant smile. Why would I pay for a stranger's bill? I retorted, my name is Maya, a 29-year-old office worker. My husband Tyrell and I were content in our relationship, except for one persistent problem, my overbearing mother-in-law. Living in close proximity to her, she invaded our lives, criticizing my cooking and homemaking skills. Uninvited, she'd barge in, pointing out every flaw, all while pretending to be a concerned mother. When I complained to Tyrell, he didn't believe me. In his eyes, his mother was just a loving parent, blind to her manipulations. As time passed, her intrusions grew worse. Armed with a key my husband had given her, she'd enter our home, criticizing and complaining about everything. She even tarnished my reputation with the neighbors, spreading lies about me. I pleaded with Tyrell to move away, but he remained indifferent, busy with work. Then, a turning point arrived. His successful project led to a promotion and a significant salary increase. Seizing the opportunity, I suggested expanding our family. Now that our income has grown, perhaps it's time to think about having children. I proposed, hoping that this positive change might finally open his eyes to the toxic presence of his mother. I thought it was a good idea, but if we're considering having children, I prefer to live in a more child-friendly town. There are very few child care centers here, and there are no parks for children to play in. Isn't it time for us to move? Finally, my husband gave a positive response about moving, and I was happier about this than the news of his promotion. However, that feeling didn't last long. The next day, my mother-in-law came over as usual without any notice. I was fed up, assuming she had come to nag again. But something seemed different this time. I've decided to celebrate my son's promotion, so I've reserved a restaurant. It's a very expensive place, but it's elegant. The food is top-notch, and the staff's attitude is wonderful. It has a great word-of-mouth reputation, she said, inviting me to join. That's nice. Good for you, I replied, trying to be polite, although I was as unfriendly as ever. Well, never mind. I want you to come to this restaurant too. Please come. I'll check my schedule, but it's probably impossible, I added. Don't say that. We'll be waiting for you, she insisted. Even though I answered that way, she just smirked and left. Until now, she had been excluding me, but now she was inviting me and saying she'd wait. There must be something going on. When I asked my husband when he got home, he said he had already told his mother that we would go together. She had reserved that restaurant for us, and he was looking forward to it. You feel the same way, don't you, Maya? He asked. Sorry, but I'm not looking forward to it. I don't know how much money it will cost at such an expensive place. I don't want to go. Just say I have urgent business and enjoy yourself. I replied, feeling apprehensive about the situation. Why are you thinking so negatively? Besides, it's not just us going to the restaurant. My brothers are bringing their wives too. It would be bad if you didn't come with the whole family, my husband insisted, excited about going to a fancy restaurant for the first time. Even though I didn't want to, I felt compelled to comply. My words no longer reached my husband. If he believed my mother-in-law more than me, I decided to record her harassment with a voice recorder I bought online. She was probably planning to harass me at the celebration too. I would record her voice and play it for my husband. If he still defended her, I would divorce him. With that decision, I felt a bit better. Still, the day to meet my mother-in-law at the restaurant was depressing, and I kept sighing. I hardly knew my husband's brothers, having only met them at the wedding, and I had no memory of talking to their wives beyond greetings. When we arrived at the restaurant, the waiter led us to a large room where my mother-in-law, the other son, and his wife, and the third son and his wife were already seated. The lavish spread was already adorning the table, with just one vacant seat. My husband, puzzled, tilted his head in confusion. Did the waiter make a mistake with the number of suits? He wondered aloud. I'll go ask. Everyone start eating, he said, leaving the room. The moment he stepped out, my mother-in-law stood up, her expression twisted into a sneer. "There's no seat for you. Why should I invite a stranger who just married my son to a family celebration?" she said, her tone dripping with disdain. "So I'll give you a choice. Show your sincerity and be accepted as family, or leave and never show your face to me again. Choose now." "I'm leaving," I answered without hesitation. Mother-in-law was momentarily flustered. Did she think I would beg her to recognize me as family in this situation? No way. "Listen to the end. If you pay the entire bill here, I'll recognize you as Terrell's wife. You must be frustrated being treated as a stranger, so pay up and become family," she demanded. "I told you I'm leaving. Why should I pay for someone else's family's bill?" I retorted, turning my back on her. Mother-in-law slammed the table and shouted, "Don't you get it? I'm offering to make you family. Are you okay with being a stranger? Pay up." "No, I'm fine being a stranger. Since I'm a stranger, I won't pay for your meal. Goodbye." Mother-in-law chased after me, but by the time she reached the entrance of the room from the farthest seat, I was already at the exit of the restaurant. When I got home, thinking I'd email my husband, he returned within 10 minutes. The waiter said the reservation number wasn't wrong, and my mom was causing a scene. "I heard the situation from my brother. I'm sorry for making you feel bad. You managed to come back quickly," he said. It seemed like my declaration that I was fine being a stranger had also stirred something in the eldest son's wife and the third son's wife. They had previously thought enduring harassment silently was the only option, but seeing me talk back made them realize they could do it too. In their momentum, both of them left, and their husbands, the eldest and third sons, hurriedly followed suit. I had braced myself for complaints from my mother-in-law, and sure enough, within 3 hours, the phone started ringing incessantly. It was so disruptive that I eventually blocked the calls. However, one call managed to get through from an unknown number. "Hello, sorry for calling so late. Is this Maya's mobile phone?" The man on the other end identified himself as a police officer from the nearby police station. He informed me that after being left alone, my mother-in-law had tried to eat what she could and subsequently attempted to make me foot the bill later on. However, the restaurant staff, already disapproving of my mother-in-law after the earlier disturbance, declined her request. They believed I wouldn't return to pay after leaving in anger. Ignoring all her calls, my mother-in-law was then suggested to pay by card, but she lacked a credit card and hadn't brought enough cash to cover everyone's meals. In a desperate bid, she tried contacting other family members to cover the costs, but no one responded. Frustrated and cornered, she started yelling, blaming me entirely for the situation. Her anger escalated, leading to a scene where she damaged expensive vases and flower pots at the restaurant. This chaos prompted the restaurant to call the police. The responding officers managed to calm down my furious mother-in-law, but she adamantly refused to accept any wrongdoing. The restaurant, not only unpaid but also burdened with a troublesome customer, sought help to escort her home. Feeling guilty about ignoring a call from the police, my husband and I reluctantly returned to the restaurant. Upon our arrival, my mother-in-law was being pacified by the police. The moment she spotted me, she raised her eyes and, crossing her arms, screamed, "You good for nothing. This situation happened because you didn't pay the bill. It's natural to help your mother, isn't it? Pay up now." I was utterly astonished when my mother-in-law uttered something almost threatening, even with the police present. They had clearly stated that if no one took her home, they would either escort her to her in-laws' house in a patrol car or arrest her for dining and dashing. "Please take her away, arrest her, or whatever it takes, just make her take responsibility," I said, my voice cold and resolute. Mother-in-law's eyes widened in shock at my words. "How can you say something so cold? I can't believe it. Just pay up. It's bad luck to have a family member arrested," she pleaded. "I don't care. I'm not family, and I don't want to get close to someone who's talking crazy and causing a scene," I replied, attempting to leave the restaurant and let the police handle the situation. However, my husband, who had remained silent all along, glared at me. I understand that what was said and done to Maya was terrible. But is it something bad enough to be arrested for? He questioned, defending his mother. "You're missing the point. She's in trouble with the police because she dined and dashed and caused a scene at the restaurant. I have nothing to do with it. Or are you saying that I'm the one at fault for not paying for 6 people's meals, even though I didn't eat?" I retorted. My husband fell silent but walked past me toward the police and the restaurant staff. I knew what he intended to do. Anticipating his actions, I called out to his retreating back. If you're going to pay for her meal and compensate them, we're getting divorced. Think about that. My husband didn't respond to my words and silently took out his wallet. I sighed and left the restaurant. Walking the familiar road back home, I started packing my essential belongings, preparing to leave. Just before the date changed, my husband finally returned. Mom's not getting arrested. It seems she was really in the wrong. But the restaurant said they'd forgive her if I compensated them and promised she'd never come back. I didn't have nearly enough money, so I had my brothers come and help. Oh, I'm so tired, he explained, his voice weary. He continued rambling about what happened after I left, seemingly annoyed by my lack of reaction. Then he approached me, noticing my packed bags. Hey, what's with these bags? He asked, puzzled. I'm preparing to leave the house because we're getting divorced. I told you that if you defended her, we'd get divorced. You're not going to say you didn't hear me, are you? I replied firmly. My husband looked down at me, his eyes wide with astonishment. Then he raised his gaze and began to yell. What's going on today? You've been acting strange all day. I understand that Mom did something terrible, but why do we have to get divorced? I've told you I'm being harassed, and even with evidence and other people's testimony, you still choose your mother, who was almost arrested, over me. Is it strange that I want to divorce someone like that? I've had enough. My husband continued to say various things, but it all went in one ear and out the other. I prepared to leave the house and made preparations for divorce. The next morning, I immediately went to get the divorce papers. When I signed and handed them to my husband, he made a big fuss about not wanting to divorce. However, when I mentioned involving a lawyer, he reluctantly signed, and I submitted the papers right away. Finally, I was able to return to being a stranger. Afterward, my husband moved out of the house and went to live with his parents. Apparently, he had relied on me for most of the housework, so he couldn't manage it himself. As a result, the house became a mess. Disliking the dirty house, he canceled the apartment lease and decided to return to his parents' home. Additionally, the eldest and third sons faced similar outcomes. On the day when my husband called his brothers to help with the compensation, they each had a big fight with their wives. The wives protested that they didn't want to pay for something that was their mother's fault, but the brothers used their savings to assist their mother without consulting them. Moreover, the brothers believed mother-in-law's words, thinking they might get arrested because of their unreasonable wives. Their love cooled at the sight of them belittling me, and they were immediately confronted with the prospect of divorce. Both of them returned to their parents' homes, refusing to do housework. In the end, mother-in-law and her 3 childlike brothers also returned to the in-laws' house. Thanks to this situation, they became a subject of mockery among the neighbors, who spread the word that all the brothers were abandoned by their wives. Mother-in-law dismissed these rumors as nonsense, passionately defending her sons and blaming us wives for their failures. The husbands, hearing the story, smugly nodded, convinced that divorcing them was the right decision. However, my relationship with the neighbors remained decent, and nobody believed these tales. They were aware of mother-in-law's nasty personality and kept their distance, quietly laughing at her. Mother-in-law became known as a failed mother who couldn't educate her sons, while the husbands gained a reputation in the neighborhood as mama's boys who defended their mother instead of protecting their wives. Despite the furious attempts of mother-in-law and the husbands to contact me, I had changed all my contact information and moved to a new house. In the end, they couldn't find us, and they lived their lives constantly complaining. Since I'm no longer involved with mother-in-law and the others, my days have become enjoyable. Being free from the stress of dealing with her is a significant relief, and making new friends has also been wonderful. In fact, during the divorce process, I bonded with the ex-wives of the eldest and third sons over our shared grievances about mother-in-law. Now, we often go out for meals and enjoy shopping on weekends. In giving me such wonderful friends, I might even have to thank my ex-husband. The day after tomorrow, we're all planning to visit a new cafe. From now on, we can do what we want. It might sound obvious, but it feels more liberating than ever before. I want to lead my own life without getting involved with such toxic people, and I am genuinely grateful for the friendships I've found. I believe I would still be living alone if it weren't for them. The reason I'm not lonely now and the reason I can live happily is all thanks to them. I'm truly thankful, and I hope this relationship continues forever. My mother-in-law told me something surprising. She said, We're going to live together now. We turned the house into 2 separate homes to make it easier. Is the house in your name, Emma? Sorry to ask, but can you pay the $80,000 bill for the changes? My mother-in-law and husband thought it was funny, but I felt determined. I was going to tell them something important, even though my husband didn't know yet. I had proof too. My name is Emma Davis, and I'm 26 years old. I live a little away from the city in a place surrounded by nature. I work in an office and draw pictures for fun. Recently, I've been sharing my drawings online and reading the comments people leave. My husband, who is 3 years older than me, and I have been happily married and living in our beloved old farmhouse since we got married. But there's been a visitor who comes by once a month since then, and they always give me a headache. Emma, I'm here. Please open up quickly. I hurried to the front door when I heard the insistent banging. Ah, it's my mother-in-law. I'll open it right away, I said, even though there's a doorbell right next to the door. I tried to smile as I opened the sliding door. There are so many bugs around here. It's so annoying. Is George still at work? Poor thing, even on Saturday. Oh, I brought some of his favorite food. I saw a tired-looking woman holding a big bag waiting at the door. As she chattered on, I tried to keep up my fake smile. This visitor, who comes once a month, is none other than my husband's mother, my mother-in-law. Since my husband is an only child, she feels it's her duty to look after him even after we got married. She even gives me tips on how to manage the house. Last time she visited, she rearranged the whole fridge, making it a hassle for me to prepare breakfast the next day. I remember my husband telling me before we got married, if my parents ever need care, we'll live together. I hope you understand. I'm disappointed at the thought of leaving our lovely old house when the time comes, but I've accepted it. What bothers me more is the idea of living with my mother-in-law all the time. I feel sorry for my husband, as it's not something I'm looking forward to. Fast forward 2 years into our married life in the farmhouse. My husband told me that his father slipped on the stairs at home and broke his leg. They'll need our help from now on. Let's live together, just like we talked about before we got married. Yes, I'm worried too. So I think it's a good idea. Can I still do my drawings? I was concerned about my father-in-law's health, so I agreed to move in with them without hesitation. But I was worried that taking care of my in-laws and doing housework might leave me with no time for my drawing hobby. Whether he knew about my worries or not, my husband just said, "I want you to focus on the house," and left for his office. Left alone in my room, I felt like I was giving up on my husband. As I looked through my drawings, I started sorting out my feelings. Just when I had decided to live with them, something unexpected happened. While I was at work, I suddenly felt numbness in my hands and feet and got really dizzy. I collapsed. Thankfully, a colleague called an ambulance, and although I wasn't in danger, it turned out I had had a stroke at a young age after a medical checkup. Even though I had been warned about high blood pressure during health checkups before, I regretted not taking it seriously and going to the hospital. From the time I found out about the illness to being hospitalized, including tests, surgery, and recovery, it took about 2 months. It all happened so quickly, and I realized my husband showed very little concern for me. After being diagnosed with a stroke at a young age, I called my husband with trembling hands. But all I heard was disappointment in his voice, saying, "So living together will have to wait, huh?" I couldn't believe he was more worried about living arrangements than my health. Luckily, my father-in-law was still in the hospital with a fracture, so I didn't have to worry about taking care of him. This allowed me to focus on my treatment, which was a silver lining. Plus, since we didn't have kids, that wasn't an added concern. Suddenly, I thought of my mother-in-law, always talking about wanting to see her grandchild soon. But I pushed that thought away and grabbed my sketchbook. Lately, I had been too busy with preparations to live with my in-laws and undergoing tests since my stroke to indulge in my favorite pastime of drawing. I knew once I moved in with them, I'd have even less time for it. I decided to view my time in the hospital as a gift of freedom from God and resolved to enjoy my hobby to the fullest. Once this period was over, I promised myself to give my best to my husband and in-laws, whether it was doing chores or anything else. The 2-month hospital stay flew by, and finally it was time to leave. My husband casually asked if he should pick me up, but I wanted some time alone, so I declined, feeling a bit guilty. As I rode the bus, I looked out the window and saw the familiar scenery. I realized I was already near home. The sunlight shining on the lush green leaves was breathtaking, and I felt a mix of emotions, thinking goodbye to this beautiful natural setting. Since my in-laws' house is closer to the city, my life is going to change a lot from now on. Feeling a bit sad, I stepped off the bus at the familiar stop. As I walked towards what was supposed to be my beloved old home, I suddenly froze in astonishment. Instead of the familiar private house I knew so well, there stood a completely unfamiliar house that I had never seen before. After being in a hospital for about 2 months, I double-checked the surrounding buildings and the path I took, wondering if I had somehow gotten a location wrong. But it was no mistake. There was no point in wandering around, so I timidly pressed the intercom of the unfamiliar house. A voice I knew well, undoubtedly my husband's, responded with a simple yes. Still feeling confused, I quietly said, "It's Michelle," into the intercom. The front door creaked open and my husband, dressed casually, appeared. "Ah, welcome home. You're back earlier than I expected. I had the day off today. I could have picked you up," George said. "George, what happened to our house? Why has it changed so much?" I interrupted him, feeling disbelief, noticing his relaxed demeanor, perhaps indicating he had just woken up with his messy hair. Ignoring my anxiousness, George only responded vaguely, "Huh. What's going on? What happened?" without addressing my question. Just then, laughter echoed from inside the house. Unable to believe it, I pushed past my husband and made my way to the living room. Opening the unfamiliar door leading to the living room, I saw my mother-in-law lying on a couch, watching TV. She was laughing heartily, holding her stomach. "Why is my mother-in-law in this house?" I asked, bewildered. "Michelle, welcome back. Hospital stays can be long, but don't worry. I took care of the house while you were gone," my mother-in-law said casually. I was puzzled by what my mother-in-law meant by taking care of the house. Did she mean chores? With a sinking feeling, I pressed her on why our old house had changed so much. Without any hint of remorse, she replied, "Well, since we're all going to live together, I thought it would be more comfortable to remodel it into a duplex." The words "remodeled it into a duplex" kept echoing in my head. My mother-in-law had always been one to meddle in our lives, but I never imagined she would renovate our house without asking. And weren't we supposed to move into my in-laws' house, closer to the city center? Every time she visited our old house, she complained about the bugs and the walk from the station. So why all the changes now? "Oh, and if something else important I have to tell you," my mother-in-law said, switching off the TV with a grin. "The remodeling cost a bit. I believe the title to this house is under your name, Michelle. I'm sorry, but could you handle the payment?" My mother-in-law chuckled, devoid of any hint of apology. "Ah, it's $80,000, she said, her smile growing wider. "That's the cost of remodeling, and the title to this house comes with it, Michelle. $80,000. Her unexpected words hit me like a punch to the head, and my legs started shaking. I couldn't even find the words to respond. As I stared at my mother-in-law, stunned and laughing without a care, my husband appeared at the entrance and slipped into the living room. Seeing him, I instinctively moved towards him, holding on to a faint hope that he would support me. I repeated to my husband exactly what my mother-in-law had said, desperately awaiting his reaction, but all I got from him was a cold reply. "Well, that sounds about right. You'll handle it, won't you?" That's just who he is. When I had a stroke, he cared more about our living arrangements than my health. He's the kind of man who listens to his mother's every word, no matter how absurd. A man who always believes his mother is right. My discomfort and dissatisfaction towards my husband reached a boiling point. Once it overflowed, I was done. With all my heart, I decided I would leave this family behind. "I understand now, George. I'm going to divorce you and your mother, Cecilia. And no, Cecilia, you can handle the renovation costs on your home." I declared this all at once and turned my back on them, intending to leave the room quickly, but they weren't going to let me go so easily. "I've been losing interest in you anyway, so it's no big deal. But remember, this house is in your name, Emma, so you have a responsibility to pay," George remarked. "That's right, feel free to leave, but please settle your dues first," added Cecilia. I was astonished by their selfishness. I couldn't help but sigh. I was sure if I turned around, I'd see their smug faces grinning in victory, but I refused to look back. I stood tall and replied, "You keep saying the house is in my name, George, but did you forget that ownership has been transferred to you?" I revealed the truth, but they only laughed, thinking I was lying to avoid paying. That's when I brought up how George had asked me to change the property's ownership when we got married, as he didn't want the house to be in his wife's name for appearance's sake. Since I didn't particularly care about the property title, I had immediately transferred it to his name. Upon hearing this, their laughter abruptly stopped, and I could feel their panic gradually setting in. I don't recall saying such a thing. There's no proof anyway, George retorted. Anticipating this response, I turned back to face them, walked past them, and opened a drawer in a shelf from our old house. Let's see, it should be somewhere around. Ah, here it is. This is the proof, I said, taking out a document that listed the property and house ownership and showed it to them. When I pointed to the part that showed the ownership was in George's name, his face went pale. That's fraud. I never thought you'd actually do it, and I definitely can't pay such a huge sum of $80,000. George exclaimed. I was disgusted by my husband's reaction. He started yelling as soon as he realized the payment obligation was on him. Since a decent conversation seems impossible, let's communicate through lawyers from now on. Cecilia, your son seems to be in quite a pickle, so please take good care of him from now on, I stated calmly beside my loud husband. I smiled at my mother-in-law, who stood dazed, and finally turned my back on them, leaving their home for good. After that, my husband called several times, but I chose to ignore him entirely, opting instead to communicate formally through a lawyer, given our strained relationship and the issues with my mother-in-law. The divorce was settled without any problems. Regarding my husband's accusation that changing the property's ownership was fraud, it was determined that it was a mutual decision made when we got married 2 years ago. My lawyer reassured me with a smile that this was neither fraud nor anything illegal. With that, all the uncertainty inside me disappeared completely. It turned out that I was supposed to foot the bill for renovating the house as soon as I got discharged from a hospital. I couldn't help but appreciate the well-executed, spiteful move of pushing me into a difficult situation just after I had undergone surgery and rehabilitation and finally got discharged due to illness. In the end, since the house was in my husband's name, it was his responsibility to pay the hefty renovation costs, and he ended up cornering himself. Moreover, I was able to secure alimony after the divorce was finalized. My husband, faced with a claim for an amount he couldn't possibly pay off, either borrowed money from risky sources or didn't pay at all. While I was in the midst of the legal battle with my husband and mother-in-law, I received an apology from my father-in-law, Bob, who had been hospitalized with a broken leg, saying, "I'm sorry for my wife and son's behavior." Of course, it didn't seem that Bob was directly involved in this matter, but it couldn't be denied that for 2 years after our marriage, he had turned a blind eye to his wife and my indifferent husband. After briefly replying to Bob's message, I made the decision to cut all ties with my old family and start afresh. Since then, my health has been gradually improving, and I was able to return to work. When I was married, I used to draw illustrations, but I always felt restricted by my husband's presence. Now, I can immerse myself in drawing whenever and however I want. Initially, drawing was just a hobby, but now I receive job offers through the social networking site where I post my illustrations. I spend more time drawing for work than for pleasure these days. My current dream is to buy an old farmhouse in a somewhat rural town using the alimony from my husband and my savings, and to open an art studio there. Today, I'm taking the first step towards realizing that dream by heading to see an old farmhouse. As I gaze out at the scenery from the bus, I can't help but think back to the day I left the hospital, the day that changed my life forever. The natural scenery outside remains the same as it was that day, but my feelings are clearer now, and I'm filled with excitement for the new life that awaits me. The leaves on the trees, illuminated by the sunlight, look so bright and dazzling.